and that new term is Ecclesia Economy, because I believe that gives a much broader picture of what we're supposed to do. Because if we talk about Ecclesia Economy, when you see business, when you see kingdom business, people think about business, and they don't think of, if you're into the 7 mountain theory, they don't think about the other 6 mountains, okay? They don't think about the entire marketplace. I call all 7 mountains the marketplace. And so when I say Ecclesia Economy, that's exactly what it sounds like. It's the economy that the Ecclesia is supposed to be promoting across the board, all right? And so I'm not going to get in the definition of the word Ecclesia tonight, okay? If we want to debate that later, you're more than welcome to. I don't think there's much debate about it, because it's basically operating in a group. It's operating in a group God-given authority. And you guys are all pretty educated here, so you probably know the Greek origins of that word. As far as the economy is concerned, tonight specifically, I'm going to dive into what's on the screen behind me. I'm going to dive into what I'm calling corruption, creativity, and cohesiveness, and I'm going to tie all this in together in a nice, neat little bow. By the time we're done, you're going to realize, number one, why Jesus came when he did and what was going on that made it such a big deal, the way he responded, the way Jesus responded, and why it was so key, and what that has to do with today. The second thing you're going to figure out is what creativity has to do with the way we were created, how we were created to create, and what that has to do with today in 2026. And then we're going to talk about cohesiveness and what that has to do, especially from a mano standpoint and from a business standpoint, and how important that is. I've only got about 20 slides. The title slide makes 21, so I'm gonna try not to rush through this, but there is a ton of information, so there's going to be some times that I'm going to talk really fast and skip through a lot of things. And one of those areas where I'm going to talk really fast is this first screen, because what you need to know is who remembers about what year roughly kind of the Old Testament ended? Does anybody know what year the Old Testament ended? Just out of curiosity. So obviously there's some debate about that stuff kind of came to an end 430 to 460 BC. Okay, so there's this 400 years of silence between the Old Testament and the New Testament. It's very important that we know exactly what happened during that time period, because this set Jesus up. This set Jesus up for coming in to do what he did. And so here's some historic facts. Tim, where'd you get these historic facts? Well, first of all, there's a friend of mine named Dave Hodgson who runs a ministry he has for the last 25 years out of Australia called Kingdom Initiatives. He's a billionaire and has done several other things as well, but his philosophy is really simple. There's no reason we should ever have to take an offering in the church ever again. Business leaders in the church should be able to fund every local congregation, and Kingdom Initiatives was started with that in mind. They are a worldwide organization. They've been much more successful in doing that in Australia, by the way, than they have in the U.S. Something else we can debate later. So I want to give him credit, and then if you guys do any studying, there's several authors that are fairly well known that wrote about this time period, including Josephus and stuff like that. That's where some of this information came from. This is all historical. This is all historical fact. So 586, that's the whole Nehemiah thing. We hear about Nehemiah and Ezra go back and build the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem, okay, and the Jews are slaughtered and taken into captivity. Then in 323, that's when Alexander the Great dies, okay? So this is all Alexander the Great, all this stuff's going on. You've probably heard about him. Jerusalem falls to Egypt after Alexander began Hellenizing the region. Hellenizing is a very important term because Hellenizing is the introduction of Greek thought. Greek thought is where we get Plato and Aristotle. Plato and Aristotle wound up, is kind of where we get the separation of, we go from Hebraic thinking to Greek thinking, where Hebraic thinking says ovada, work, and it's the same Hebrew word for both work and worship, okay? Where we start to separate the secular and the sacred. And so that is Greek thought. That's kind of where Plato came in and Aristotle came in. The Greeks brought a lot of great things to us, but they separated this whole process with Hebraic thinking. So in 198 BC, Seleucid King Antiochus the Great conquers Jerusalem. His son later claims to be God incarnate. There's more of that going on than you realize during this time period, okay? About people claiming to be God themselves. sparking a rebellion. Some of you are old enough to remember there was a mini-series called Masada years ago with the Maccabee Revolution. They reclaimed Jerusalem, and this is kind of the Jews taking stuff back over. The Hasmonean king priests are exactly what they sound like. That was the Hasmonean, I think it was a family name, and those were these Jews operated as king priests. The problem was that they operated with an absolute iron fist. Okay, and it was an oppressive regime. Short version is that there were two brothers that fought over, and they both sent a letter to Rome saying, "Hey, we're the guy in charge here." And Roman Emperor Pompey realizes that because of this civil war going on, that he can rush in and take stuff over. The Jewish people become subject to the savagery of Rome. What is set up here is savagery after oppression after oppression. Basically, what we read about in Nehemiah and Ezra, the Babylonians taking people into captivity, was just the beginning of the next 400 years of everything that they went through. Now, here's something else. When we talk about the uprisings and things that took place, here's a very interesting fact that took place roughly around 6 AD. So when Jesus was about 10 years old, and Jesus' hometown was Nazareth, which was this little do-nothing town outside a larger city called Sepphoris. And there's a guy by the name of Judas the Galilean who basically claimed to be a Messiah. And he came in and he led a rebellion in the city of Sepphoris. He came in and he killed a bunch of Roman soldiers. Well, Rome said, "Nope, you're going to get away with that." So they responded in typical Roman fashion. Romans came in, they burned the entire city, Sepphoris, to the ground, which was a larger city, much larger city than Nazareth. They enslaved survivors, and they crucified over 2,000 Jews in one day. Now, this is a little bit of a side story to everything I'm going to cover tonight from an economic standpoint, but this is a very interesting fact. First of all, this tells you what was going on, the oppression that was happening. But what would happen is when they would crucify that many people, the Romans would say, "Hey, they're crucifying people to keep rebellion down." Crucifixion was basically saved for these rebellious leaders who were trying to rise up against the government. So to keep the rebellions down, they would force everybody within about a 15-mile radius to come and watch the crucifixions. So guess what? Nazareth was within the radius of Sepphoris, and anybody who lived in Nazareth at this time would have had to come, and they would have been forced to watch 2,000 men be crucified. So guess what Jesus was doing when he was 10 years old? Jesus was sitting there watching men upon thousands of men literally be crucified. Now, at this point, he's still God incarnate, so I don't have any idea what's going through his head, but there is speculation that there has to be at least something going through his head about his future, even as a 10-year-old, even as a 10-year-old boy. Nevertheless, this is what he was exposed to, and what he knew. If he was God, if he was thinking like God, he knew that was in store for him. If he knew that far in advance, regardless, this is totally framed his mindset for the next several decades. So that's just something to keep in mind, that Jesus actually experienced that. Okay, probably going to spend more time on this slide because of the details more than anything else. So here's the core problem. What we had this unholy alliance between Rome and the wealthy Jews, the wealthy Jewish autocracy at the time, and basically there were taxes upon taxes upon taxes. The Jews had a relationship with Rome, and basically Rome was smart enough to do this. They were smart enough to say, "Hey, here's the deal. We're going to put this local guy like Herod in charge. Herod, you're going to deal with the local guys who are the priests." And so Rome got their taxes, Herod got their taxes, everybody got their taxes. And then they hired somebody like Matthew or Levi or Zacchaeus or Levi, and they would have, and to collect the taxes, they would have taken a little bit off the top, and you see where I'm going. You've got immediately 4 or 5 different layers of taxes of the people are paying at this point in time. Plus you've got the temple taxes, and I need to explain this really quick. You've got the temple taxes where if somebody comes in from out of town and they're coming from, I don't know, let's say they're coming from Nazareth to Bethlehem because because they're doing a census or something, and they have to go to the temple and make a sacrifice. Well, you can't bring a lamb with you all the way. You can't bring doves with you all the way from Nazareth because they're going to have blemishes by the time they get there. So they would set up. So the priests set up temple shepherding stuff and temple doves, and where you could buy them directly from the priest. By the way, the shepherds that the shepherds that the angels appeared to at Jesus' birth, that's what they were doing. They were minding the temple sheep. So guess what? They travel. They can charge whatever price they want because that's the only place you can get an unblemished lamb. But here's the deal: you come from Nazareth. You know, the Nazareth Canadian dollar is not worth what the Jerusalem U.S. dollar is, so now you've got to do the money exchange. They wind up at the money exchanging table. That gets bumped up in price, and you can see that there's layer upon layer of taxation and corruption. So Jesus didn't have to fight didn't necessarily have to fight Baal like Elijah did. He had to fight the spirit of greed and corruption and mammon. So keep that in mind as we talk about this further and what our assignment is here in a little bit. Like I mentioned, he converted tax collectors such as Levi, who's Matthew, and Zacchaeus, because they moved wealth from point A to point B, and so he healed the sick for free and forgave sins for free. Services that were charged a large exorbitant fee by the temple priests. So see what's starting to happen here. What's starting to happen is that this is about Jesus taking money out of the temple pocket. All right. So this is direct economic impact to the corrupt system that was at play. When he fed the 5,000 and 3,000, he fed hungry peasants. Okay, you keep people, and at this point they realize that you keep people poor, that you can keep people oppressed. By the way, the temple taxes were so bad that what would happen would be that they didn't have the money to pay the temple taxes, or to pay the temple fees, or pay the whatever. But as a good Jew, you still had to do that. So they would actually do things like sell their children into slavery in order to cover some of these costs in the extreme. Okay, that was definitely known to happen. So child trafficking and high taxes and corrupt politicians it's nothing new. All right, it's been around for a full years. Let's talk about the money changers and the benches that Jesus overturned. This is a fun part for me, because what happened was that these benches were 2,000 pounds worth of heavy benches. We did a physical miracle turning the bench over. It's the root word there is the word bank or bonk, where we get our word bank from. It was when they turned a table over, that means they had run out of money, literally. And so when somebody themselves they said, hey, we're closed down, we're out of business, we don't have money left, they turned their own benches over. So what he did was he came through when he turned the tables over. Not only was he doing a physical miracle, but he was saying, hey, guess what? I'm bankrupting you guys. You guys are morally bankrupt. Because Jesus wasn't anti-money; he was anti-corruption. So that's what he was going. That's what he was going after. A couple of the things that happened were that the veil. This veil was torn, as you know in the story, which is another blockade that was between this priesthood wall and the people wall that set up a new freedom. And Jesus' Great Commission is he did it to oust greed and fear and corruption and replace it with a kingdom culture of caring and sharing. And this is what we know as the gospel of the kingdom. Okay, and the discussion about the gospel of the kingdom versus the gospel of salvation, both are valid. It just so happens that the gospel of the kingdom is mentioned a whole lot more than the gospel of salvation. Okay, part 2. We are created to be creative beings. And if there's anything I want you to simply take away from this slide, is that there's this biblical framework for human creativity and productivity, and it's rooted in the concept of Imago Dei, the idea that humans were created in the image of a creator God. Okay? So I want you to keep that basic in mind. When we look at Genesis 2, the context here is that the first recorded act of this is the first recorded act of human creativity. God invites Adam to use his intellect and imagination to categorize and name the animal kingdom. More context about the mandate to work and cultivate. Genesis 1, called the cultural mandate, is the original instruction for human productivity. To harness raw materials in the earth, build civilization, and multiply its potential. Genesis 2:15, humans were given a job, cultivating the earth, and is framed as a sacred duty and expression of human purchase. I think I mentioned previously that the Hebrew word avoda is the same word for both work and worship. In the Hebraic world, there was no difference. It was the same thing. Your work is your worship. We have a false sense of what worship is today because somehow we want to divide the sacred from the secular, like the Greeks taught us. And so somehow worship has become something that is done on Sunday morning before the pastor speaks, or a special Friday night worship event or something like that, when in all reality those should be called more like praise services, and worship should be done 24/7. So when we jump into the expectation of increase in the parable of the talents, again, we're talking about creativity, that God expects a return on investments. We're not called to simply just maintain the status quo. We're instructed to take entrepreneurial and calculated risks to increase what we're handed. Practical wisdom literature is principles. Productive action yields positive increase. I love that phrase right there. Productive action yields positive increase. And then in Proverbs 31, the chapter celebrates obviously an industrial, creative woman. I like this one. The first time the Bible mentions someone being filled with the Spirit of God, it wasn't for preaching or leading. It was for artistic craftsmanship and architectural design. Now, you guys know what the law of first mentions is? Law of first mentions is basically the first time something is mentioned in the Bible is kind of sets a foundation. So the first mention of being filled with the Spirit of God is actually relates to artistic craftsmanship and architectural design, which I find extremely interesting. So, question is a couple other pieces here about bearing fruit and some other things that again, back to human productivity, labor, artistic, physical, entrepreneur, intellectual. I hope you guys see where I'm going with this. That very simply put, we are creative beings we're created beings designed to be creative and to create, and that's what we're supposed to do. And I'm going to a very specific place with this, and that is this. Hang tight. We're going to jump into economy and politics here for a second. There is an American system of government that was started in the past and that we're trying to get back to, and there is an imperialistic system of government. I'm going to compare those side by side in a second, but let's talk about the creative American system. First of all, it's rooted in the belief that humans are not animals or playthings of an elite class. By the way, this isn't from Scripture. This is all from political action, folks. Okay, this is what I'm reading here. So this is all straight from their stuff. It's just crazy how it coincides. But elevating human potential is rooted in the belief that humans are not animals or playthings of an elite class, but beings endowed with creative power to do good in the world. The government is simply a catalyst. Its purpose is not to control, but to build a supportive environment through a robust infrastructure, accessible credit, where productive industry and ingenuity can flourish. A production economy is built by prioritizing the building and making of things. Society retains the skills to design an event, recognizing the ability to manufacture is deeply linked to the ability to innovate.
And the system looks towards the future, advancing civilization to a higher plateau through massive creative and scientific leaps such as fusion energy, AI, human space travel. The American system, the American economy, okay, the American economic system is a system built to unleash human creativity and ingenuity. It was originally designed by Alexander Hamilton. It was embraced by Abraham Lincoln. It was embraced by William McKinley. And it's been embraced by other presidents since then. I think there'd be an argument made that Kennedy started to embrace this a little bit. Okay, there's a huge argument that this is that Trump is operating at a higher, different level right now and embracing something completely different. Okay, I want you to set politics completely aside for a second. I want you to think from an economic standpoint what's happening. Okay, and don't worry about left or right. Let's talk about your creativity and your ability to create, and if the world right now is opening up for you to be able to do that. When we compare these two systems side by side, what is the imperialist or the globalist system? And a little bit of history on this. The imperialist system or the globalist system is actually based in London. That's where kind of the global headquarters is. So for this whole process, there's also a financial center actually in Rome that supports this. And a lot of the stuff that's been going on, even in Iran and Venezuela and different places recently, have been actually traced back to what's going on to this imperialist system in London. There's a reason that these areas are opening up for us. But here's side by side. Again, the American system sees people as builders, pioneers, creators. The imperialist, the global system treats human beings as a source of cheap labor and relentless consumption. The economic driver is production of commodities, technological breakthroughs, and human intelligence. The imperialist system, driven by extraction of wealth, financialization of trade, and constant transportation of artificially cheap goods. Impact on society. The American system fosters vibrant ecosystems of production, dignity of labor, self-sustaining cycle of wealth. Again, reading straight from the screen. Imperialist leads to profound loss of communal identity, deindustrialization. The imperial system leads to depopulation, ignorance, barbarianism, and universal war. The ultimate trajectory for the American system is it elevates the condition of humanity, aiming for increased comfort, civilization, and universal peace. The American system is a creative model, like a community that desires to protect its craftsmen, gives them the best possible workshops, materials, and support possible because they're actively building, experimenting, producing, and continually inventing better tools, new technologies. They pay each other well for their unique creations in a society that thrives and relies on boundless creativity. Thank you for allowing me to read that straight from the screen, guys. The bottom line is that we are part of what we're in the middle of right now as we fight the corruption that's constantly being exposed, is we're being set up to return to an American system economy where your creativity, your personal creativity, is what creates an economy and what creates income for you, what creates your personal economy and allows you to move forward in society. It backs its makers, compounds its creativity, pride, and prosperity. So as creative beings, that's exactly where we want to be. In order to fulfill God's mandate, that's exactly where we want to be. So let's talk about fulfilling that mandate here for a little bit. So I like to say that Jesus, when he quotes Isaiah 61 in Luke chapter 4, I call that Jesus' mandate, because he says, hey, this is why I'm here. This is why I showed up. He came to provide economic integrity and solutions, which is good news to the poor, favor in the year of our Lord. He's challenging predatory lending and exploitation. He's dismantling oppression, so he's setting the oppressed free. And there's a problem solver mandate along with this. Isaiah 61 continues past what Jesus read. Because here's the deal. When Jesus read Isaiah 61, and kind of as Luke tells it, as we read it in Luke today, what we see is that he kind of stops abruptly, okay? All right? But here's the deal. That passage was read so often from Isaiah. Everybody knew what was coming next. Everybody knew the rest of the chapter. So even if he did literally stop abruptly at that point, everybody knew the rest of the chapter. Everybody knew what was coming. So we can safely say that there's this problem solver's mandate where we are to rebuild the ancient ruins and restore the places long devastated. We have a very specific assignment in that. Pushing back against cosmic decay. If we jump in and we dive into Romans chapter 8, 19 to 21, where it talks about that the world is crying out for us, for the children of God, to be the ones who provide the answers, providing for us. They're looking for us to be corruption fighters. The Greek word here is pthora, translates to corruption, ruin, or decay. It applies to environmental degradation driven by corporate or government greed, as well as disease, death, and the breakdown of natural order. Paul notes that believers have the first fruits of the Spirit, verse 23, meaning that Christians are meant to be a preview of a fully restored world. In this context, we're supposed to be the problem solvers. That's the bottom line. We're supposed to be the creative ones. We're supposed to be the problem solvers. We're supposed to be the corruption fighters. Additional information here, Proverbs 31, we're supposed to speak up for those that can't speak for themselves, defend the rights of the poor. Again, corruption thrives behind closed doors. We're supposed to act justly, which means is to show people how to do the right thing. We're supposed to do what is right and fair. Somebody prophesied Isaiah 58:12 over me years ago as a life verse. We're supposed to be repairer of broken walls and restorer of the streets. And so if you go back and read Isaiah 58, especially verse 12, it really talks about how we're supposed to step in and be repairers of the breach. We're supposed to be restorers of the streets, restorers of the houses to dwell in. Ultimately, the Bible positions believers as a vanguard, actively working to bring heaven's absolute honesty, justice, and I really like that. I'm going to read that whole thing again. I'm going to start over a little bit slow. Ultimately, the Bible positions believers as a vanguard, actively working to bring heaven's absolute honesty, justice, and creative solutions to earth here and now. This is the last section, so I'm making really good time, and I like this because then we can have a discussion and get to know each other a little bit. And this, I want to dive into this business of fellowship a little bit, because everything I just said, this corruption fighting, this problem solving, the corruption that we're supposed to be fighting, the creativity that we're supposed to be having, and the timing that we have it in right now, because we have incredible timing right now. We have incredible political timing. We have incredible socioeconomic timing. There's a lot going on right now. There's a lot of upheaval, and quite frankly, I'm excited because that means that it's a better time for us to jump in and provide solutions as believers. It's an awesome opportunity for us to be exactly who God designed us to be. So this is the most challenging portion of what I'm sharing tonight, and that's this piece where if you want to call it the business of fellowship, maturing through family and commerce. Hang tight. Here we go. The premise is this: God designed humans. God gave us two things to show who He is and to relate with each other, and that was the family and commerce. Those are the first two things He gave us in the garden. Were family and commerce. When it talks about multiplying, He's talking about multiplying each other, growing gardens. The initial intent was for Adam and Eve to expand the garden to the entire world. Okay, that's what I believe, and some other scholars believe the same thing. Obviously, we messed it up. But that was the original intent. So the original intent was commerce. The commerce part didn't go away. The family part didn't go away. Okay, it became all of it became more difficult, but neither of it went away, because the family and commerce are the two things that God gives us to relate to each other and to show us who He is and to show us His nature in family and in commerce. These are not simply about survival or wealth generation. They're divine crucibles. Remember that phrase. They're divine crucibles to forge personal growth, character, and spiritual maturity. So I'm going to slow down through this part and actually just basically repeat this in a different way. Family is there to cause you to grow. Your business bros are there to make you stronger and to cause you to grow. Okay? And so if you've got a challenge with your family, or you've got a challenge with your business bros, that means you have an opportunity for you to grow and you've got an opportunity for the other person to grow. The thesis of this is that when we approach business through the lens of biblical unity and family dynamics, commerce transforms from a transactional burden into a redemptive ecosystem.